I've been getting a ton of requests lately to finally do something with Hollow Knight on this channel. I thought more and more requests were coming in for it because the sequel Silksong was releasing soon, but it turns out the February 2022 release date is just a rumor. But whatever the reason, I finally took some time to play a bit of the game and research the lore, which was way more complicated than I was expecting. But I do feel like I've finally learned enough about them to take Hollow Knight characters, redesign them and rewrite them if they were in a horror story. Which Hollow Knight already has horror elements, but whatever, you'll see what I mean in a sec. Let's get into it, shall we? Let's go. Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. From the second I took one step into the old Hollowsville mine, I knew something was gonna go wrong. Every fiber of my being told me to turn and run, and I almost did. I glanced back at the group of so-called friends behind me, making chicken noises and bets on how far I'd make it in. I had to keep going. I had to prove to all of them that I wasn't the coward they all thought I was. Even though I hadn't even convinced myself of that. I took another step, trying to act confident, then another and another. I was probably the first person to step foot in that place in decades. The land had been owned for ages by old Bill Pellen. He'd always had vicious guard dogs just inside the fence that blocked the only entrance to the mine, and nobody ever knew why he was so desperate to keep people out of there. But he died mysteriously just a week prior, and his dogs had been taken to a kennel. Kids back at Gibson High School had always wanted to know what was in that mine, and now all that stood in the way was an easily cut-through fence. Unfortunately, I'd made the stupid decision of tagging along just to get goaded into going in first. My steps slowed as my heart pounded faster and faster. I had my phone as a light, but even still, darkness seemed to be creeping in all around me more and more. Something on the ground caught my eye, and I jumped and whipped my light down at it. A beetle the size of my fist crawled past, and I screamed before clamping my hand over my mouth. Everyone outside laughed hysterically. Cherry the chicken, I heard them call. I snarled at myself for having screamed, but I couldn't help it. I really hated bugs. I went to take another step forward till I saw two more bugs dart across the ground, and I turned to run out. The laughs came louder and louder as I headed back to the entrance, but then an echoing cracking sound overtook everything else. I stopped and looked at my feet to see the stone beneath me splitting. Before I could even call out, the earth gave way and I fell through. My phone got lost in the chaos as I slid in blackness down a rocky slope that bent and twisted all around. I screamed out to nothing as I slid deeper and deeper. Finally, I dropped through the ceiling of a tunnel and free fell 12 feet onto a mossy ground. I covered my head as the last few rocks slipped down after me and thudded against my arms. I lay there, winded and gasping for air. With a wheezing voice, I tried calling out for help, but I had no idea if anybody could hear me down here. I'd fallen so far. And honestly, knowing who I'd come here with, I wouldn't have been surprised if they'd all just run away after I fell. That thought made my heart thud even faster. I picked myself up. My back and arms were covered in cuts, but nothing seemed too deep. As I looked at my wounds, it finally dawned on me that despite my phone being gone, I could still see clearly. A hazy blue glow kept everything around me in sight, and it looked nothing like a mine down here. Many of the rocks were smooth and patterned like shells, and there was some kind of blue grass growing all around. It swayed despite a lack of breeze, making my eyes dart, thinking I saw something alive in every direction. My mind reeled faster and faster to thoughts of dying down here, and it made my heart pound harder and harder, as if it were trying to punch through my chest to end it all already. I tried leaping for the hole above me, but my fingers could barely scrape it. I kept jumping and calling up, hoping anything would happen. Until something did. There was a quiet clicking sound down one of the tunnels that grew louder and louder and louder. I stood paralyzed, waiting. Footsteps joined the sound, getting closer and closer. Until it stopped. For a brief pause, there was nothing. Then, in a burst of white light, dashing into the tunnel, appeared a 7-foot-tall, tendril-covered bug creature, standing on hind legs and wielding a blade. It tilted its head at me as its pincers twitched. I have no idea if I screamed or cried. All I know for sure is I started to run. I ran and ran, not allowing myself to look back, but knowing the creature followed, as I could hear its clicks and steps as it drew nearer and nearer. My mind kept telling me it would catch me any second, and I had to go faster, but my body wouldn't allow it. I sprinted into an open cavern, but took little notice of my surroundings. I ran for another tunnel, but just as I was about to reach it, out of nowhere, a gate crashed down in front of me, blocking the way. I slammed into it and shook it as hard as I could. I tried to lift it back up, but it was too heavy. I whipped around to look for other exits, but there was only the way I'd come in. Had this been a trap? Was that thing luring me here to kill me? Had old Bill Pellen built gates down here to try and keep that thing in? My mind reeled, but as my eyes darted for other exits, I noticed that the creature wasn't chasing me anymore. It was gone. Could it camouflage, I thought? Was it really chasing me, or had I been hearing things? Then, my mind landed on a thought that made my heart stop. It was some kind of bug creature. Had it crawled onto the ceiling above me? With my lip quivering, my eyes slowly turned upwards. Something fell towards me, but it was far larger than I expected. Smashing into the room before me was a colossal armored beetle creature wielding a mace 3 times the size of my body. Its stomp shook the earth and I fell against the gate. I pushed my body into it hopelessly, as if I could somehow shove myself through, but it was no use. The creature lowered its massive head towards me till it was an inch away from my face. A foul odor fumed out as its mandibles opened and a cascade of red tongues lashed out. I turned away, but soon felt them tapping and sliding against my hair and shoulder. I swatted them away, and that made the creature reel back. It let out a rumbling roar and raised its mace above its head. I wanted to run, but my body froze, waiting to be pulverized. But just as the creature began to swing, something darted into the chamber and thudded against its armor. It spun around and I looked past to see the creature from earlier. It leapt 20 feet into the air and slashed its blade at the beast's arm, slicing right between its armor. The creature shrieked in pain and it swung its mace in a circle, but the smaller creature dashed to the ground and evaded it. Were they fighting over who got to eat me? Or feed me to their little bug babies? I had no idea, but I didn't want to find out. As the smaller creature darted around, swinging its blade like a mutant knight, they finally stepped aside enough to leave a clearing back to the tunnel I'd come from. There had been another direction. Maybe there was an escape the other way. Not giving myself any more time to think, I ran. The earth shook again and made me stumble into a wall, but I kept running. I looked back for a second, and the smaller creature's eyes met mine. It clearly knew I was running now. I just had to hope it lost the fight, as the other creature was too big to fit through this tunnel. I ran, and the sounds of the battle faded behind me. I got back to where I'd started, but kept running. I stormed through more and more tunnels. I darted past more bugs the size of small dogs that hissed as I dodged around them. My hope of surviving this slipped further and further away. Eventually, I just stopped and slumped to the ground with tears streaming down my face. At that point, I just wanted something to end me quickly. And the caves almost brought me that very thing. There was a quiet chime sound just before a silver blade exploded through one of the tunnels towards me. It stabbed into the wall beside me. I thought it had missed. But then a fiery, searing pain exploded through my arm as I realized it had sliced a huge gash in my shoulder. The blade was pulled back by a red rope towards another creature coming right at me. The creature snatched its weapon from the air as it came into view. It was similar in size to the first creature, but clad in a red cape and had a narrower head and frame. It got closer and thrust its blade at my chest, and I just barely ducked aside on instinct. I leapt up to run as it tried to pull its blade from the wall, but it swung its arm under me and tripped me. I rolled across the ground and just crawled, my body no longer wanting to move as pulses of pain kept exploding through my shoulder. The red-clad creature ripped its blade free and lunged onto my back, stomping me into place. Its black clawed arm grabbed me and flipped me over as it pressed its blade against my neck. It stared down into my eyes with incomprehensible rage, clacking its mandibles as its face drew closer and closer to mine. Its head slowly started to spin around so the pincers on the back of its head were pointed an inch in front of my face. My instincts told me to try shoving it off and running, but what good was running doing me? I had nowhere to go, something else would just find me. The pincers opened around my head, and I just shut my eyes, waiting for them to clamp down on me. I'm so useless, was almost my last thought. But just before having my head crunched, the creature was blasted off me by an explosion of white light. My vision got fuzzy, but as it cleared, I saw the knight-like beetle from earlier leaping at the red-clad creature, swiping its sword, clashing against the other's blood-dripping weapon. The knight kept its body between me and the other at every move, like it was guarding me. The red creature lashed its blade at an impossible speed, making the rope attached swing violently and batter against the knight, but it took the hits and held its ground. The knight then dashed forward, swinging its sword and cutting right through the red creature's leg, then shoving it backwards. The narrower creature stumbled back, clicking its mandibles angrily and holding its leg. It was clearly wounded, but it also looked down at the ground beneath it. I doubted that the knight had noticed, but I saw what the other did. The ground beneath the red one was cracking, like it had on me earlier. It stepped back and waited for the knight to attack. I wanted to call out for it not to, but no words came to me. The knight dashed, and the other creature jabbed its blade into the ground and leapt aside. The earth gave way, and the knight fell through, tumbling into darkness. The red creature looked into the hole, satisfied, then turned back to me. It limped slowly at me. I could get away now if I ran, it would be too slow and wounded to follow. But part of me felt bad for the knight. It could have still been trying to just save me for itself, but that didn't feel right. And what good had running done me anyway? Holding my shirt to my shoulders, soaking up the blood, I ran towards the creature, ignoring the pounding fear in my head. It slashed its blade, and I slid under, right into the hole in the ground. I slid farther and farther, tearing more cuts into my arms and legs against jagged rocks, until I tumbled into another open chamber. I leapt up and looked back. The red creature didn't seem to be following. I stepped back cautiously from the opening anyway, and noticed how much darker this room was than all the others. Worse still, I glanced around and saw that all above me, hanging from the ceiling, were other bug creatures. Or at least the withering husks of their bodies, torn apart and decaying. Nothing down here had felt good, but this room seemed the worst of all. I looked around quickly for the knight, and up over on a ledge I thought I saw it, sitting in silence with an orange glow spilling up from beneath. I slowly walked closer, pulled myself onto the ledge, then saw its pincers twitch. Its head twisted all the way around and looked at me, and finally I realized this wasn't the same creature. The ground below what I'd thought was the night broke open, and through it crawled a massive black spider body with a glowing mass of orange goop for a stomach. What I'd seen before was just its head. Its maw opened up and shrieked at me before stamping towards me. I leapt off the ledge and ducked as it ran over me, leaping to the ground a few feet away. I tried crawling back up on the ledge, but my arm was becoming more and more useless from the pain. A leg swung out and smacked me, knocking me into the air and sending me rolling across the platform. It clambered up behind me, but then my mysterious savior finally swooped in again, driving its sword through one of the spider's legs, making it shriek and spit orange slime everywhere. One of the globs hit the knight, and it let out an ear-splitting shriek. It rubbed the stuff off quickly and kept fighting, but it was clearly wounded. The spider struck it with one of its legs and sent the knight flying backwards, smashing into a pillar. I looked around for anything that could help, but saw nothing, except for an exit. There was a dark tunnel ahead, too small for the spider to fit through, and once again, running became an option. I looked back to see the knight being battered by the legs of the creature. The spider knocked its sword away and spat another glob of orange at its leg, once more making the knight reel in pain. It wouldn't be able to protect me much longer. Running might be the only way. I bet any of my so-called friends would have run in that situation too. Nobody could call me a chicken for doing it. I stood up, ready to go, but then saw how close I was to the knight's disarmed sword. Again, I thought nobody else would try to fight that thing, and nobody would even believe me if I did. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Except that wasn't quite true. Ignoring the thudding of my heart and the searing pain in my arm, I grabbed the sword. Almost everything I'd done down here had been a reaction out of fear, and I didn't want to be a coward anymore. So I really did have something to prove. to myself. I ran towards the spider, which was facing away from me and about ready to sink its pincers into the night. I leapt off the ledge, put all my weight behind the blade, and tackled it straight into the creature's neck. It lashed in pain and instantly threw me off, but the blade stayed in. The beast clawed at it with its legs, trying to get it out, but before it could, the knight leapt up, grabbed the hilt, and thrust it in farther, before slashing it all the way through. The monster's head came clean off. Its pincers gnashed together on the ground as its body stumbled in a circle. Eventually, the separate body parts slowed. The beast stumbled to the ground and all light drained from its eyes. It finally lay still. An overwhelming sense of pride briefly pulled me away from my fear. I'd actually helped. But the fear did slip back quickly as the knight turned to me. It walked closer, and it was finally time for me to find out if this thing truly was on my side. I stood ready, unsure if I could do anything to protect myself, but ready all the same. It got a few feet away and stopped. Our eyes locked. Finally, it raised its hand and pointed up. I glanced up, and it just seemed to be pointing at the ceiling, but I was hoping I knew what it meant. I cautiously nodded. Then it did as well. The knight turned, gestured for me to follow, and we headed up through the tunnels. I didn't know how long it could take or what else we'd face on the way, but because I'd finally had a moment of courage, I was on my way to safety.
Oh, there you go. I finally worked with Hollow Knight characters, but I am definitely happy to continue this series or do other things with them. I've gotten lots of suggestions in the past for other specific things I could do with Hollow Knight characters, but always happy to read more, so leave them in the comments. And of course, if you're new to the channel and you want more horror, creepy kind of art like this, you can check out either the Pokemon as SCPs videos or the Phobias as Demons episodes. Those are pretty similar format to these. I mean, this was more story-focused, those are more lore-focused, but whatever, it's similar kind of art. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending the video on a positive or motivational note, and today I want to give my take on a quote I've heard from a lot of motivational speakers, which was originally by Frank Sinatra, which is that the best revenge is massive success. And I think that's kind of a fun idea, but my take on it would be more so, the best revenge is not needing revenge. It's a lot harder to enjoy the process of achieving something if the whole time you're trying to get through it just so you can rub in someone else's face that you were able to achieve it. You should do something for the good that it'll bring you and the others around you, not to prove to someone else that you could. Try to focus on the more positive reasons that you're trying to achieve something, and the journey to achieving it will probably be a lot more fun. Hope that's helpful to someone out there. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.